When you really understand the purpose of emotions, your whole perspective on your life will change. What we want to do with all emotions is... Freud came out and said anxiety is caused by suppression. No emotion is right and wrong. All emotions have a purpose. If you are going through pain or struggle right now, your pain can be your potential.
Self-love and compassion.
Many people in the world, they operate from a place of self-esteem, not self-compassion. My inner critic was really big on this whole nice guy thing. I was the nice guy. It's one of the biggest lies in the personal growth industry that you should work on your self-esteem. It's external. Self-compassion says, I love me unconditionally.
It becomes a defense mechanism. Anger can come out in really toxic ways.
You are not your mind. You are not your thoughts, your emotions, your beliefs. You actually have the power to transcend the mind, be your most authentic self.
Episode, I wanted to let you know about my groundbreaking program, Breaking the Chains of Avoidance, a program designed just for avoidant men to help them from going from avoidance of relationships and love into deep connection and the abilities to create deep connection and lasting relationships. Right. So if you're interested in this, if avoidance is ruining your dating life and your relationships, just go down to the description below and you can put yourself onto the wait list so that you can get a huge discount off when I launch the program. In a few weeks. The program will be starting on the 22nd of April, so don't delay. Welcome back, listeners, back to another episode. And today I have with me a man who I followed for quite a while and has a really beautiful way about him, just a calming and kind of inviting way about him. I'm lucky enough to have had a coaching session, really experience his beautiful methods and the really range of methods that he brings in to create transformation, to create shift in both mind, body, and at a spirit level that doesn't just kind of leave you feeling like you've got something for a few hours to make you feel good, but something that really you can take forward into your life and start to apply to the different emotional areas and the ways in which you might be carrying shame or guilt, which was what came up in the session we did. And so I'm really, really happy to have with me today. Nilesh, how are you doing?
Thank you so much, David. It's a real pleasure to serve you. You're an amazing ready participant, a willing participant. So yeah, it was lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, man. And we kind of talked about this before we jumped on, but I'm gonna dive straight. I like to dive straight in more and more. One of the things I've noticed, right, in my work, both personally and for the friends I know, is that often we come to this sort of work, this deep personal work, this emotional work, through our own pain, our own deep wounding, our own personal failure. And I wondered, what is your personal battle scar that kind of spurred you, should we say, onto this path?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Quite simply, it was a patient complaint. So if you can picture the scene, I was a young Asian boy with a dream to become a doctor, which I'm sure people can resonate with. And I fulfilled that dream, and it was wonderful. I found a job at my dream practice. I became a GP partner at quite a young age, at 27. And I had everything going for me. I'd go to parties and people would say, oh, you've got the house, you've got the job, I had a son that was just born. And I felt on this external, like many people do, that everything was ticked. But I was going through a lot of internal pain and struggle. And I remember one day in particular, I was really stressed out. I had papers all over my desk. I had things all up on the screens. The irony was I was trying to reform this appointment system as a GP. So as you know, people wait a long time to see their GP. And my whole goal was to get the wait down to 0 days from 30 days. And I took my eye off the game, and there was a patient right in front of me, I remember, and they were struggling. And basically, although I did everything logically correct, I got the diagnosis correct, just sent them for emergency treatment, they wrote a complaint about how uncompassionate I was. And that actually sent me into a period of deep introspection. What is this thing, compassion? I was so affected. The ego was chinked. I didn't understand anything about that at that stage. So that was a pivotal moment that led me onto this journey of compassion, and it really led me to the truth that I share now, which is compassion is the key and compassion is the answer. So that's a little mantra of mine. There are many, many other painful moments, of course, and I think something that I would say is, your pain can be your potential. So if you are going through pain or struggle right now, then hopefully through this episode, we're going to share with you how you can transform that pain into your potential.
Incredible. It's a patient complaint, which I imagine is something that, happens a lot. I've had some clients who are dentists, for instance, and I remember having a conversation with them, and they're like, patient complaints are like this thing that kind of lord over them at times. You mentioned in that patient complaint there was some inner kind of struggles you were dealing with at that time. What were they, if you want to describe some of that?
Yeah, it's so interesting to think about this, actually, because I'm going to bring up something called retroactive change, which many of you, if you're on the journey of personal growth, you will have experienced without knowing it. And that's exactly what it is change that happens, but you're not even aware that it's happened. Mm. So when I'm recalling this, I'm thinking, what was I struggling with back then? It's almost difficult to think of because it's left my consciousness now. And that's how you really know if you've transcended or you've moved into a new level of awareness. But yeah, thinking back, the inner critic was huge. Had to be the best, had to be a good boy, had to do well, had to perform. And also my inner critic was really big on this whole nice guy thing. I was the nice guy. So actually, very interestingly enough, my clients, I like to call them nice performers, right? So they have two main struggles. The first thing is they feel like they have to be nice in order to be fully loved. And the second thing is they feel like they have to perform in order to be fully loved. So that was basically what I was dealing with a lot back then. And the problem is with these conditions that we place on how lovable we feel or how good we feel is that, the highs are high, but the lows are really, really low. And that's what I was experiencing then, these kind of peaks and troughs. And to delve a little deeper, this is essentially what made me find self-compassion, because as many people in the world, they operate from a place of self-esteem, not self-compassion. And it's one of the biggest lies in the personal growth industry that you should work on your self-esteem. You should absolutely not. Don't work on self-esteem. That will get you into the same troubles that I got into. So
that's a controversial opinion amongst, especially many of the people I work with are men, and the thing they often cry out for is like, I want to have, a better self-esteem, which I think sometimes people aren't actually clear on the kind of definition of self-esteem. I'd be interested in knowing what you see it as.
Exactly. So this is what I would love to bring up, because a lot of the work I do is, one thing I will say is that everyone has their own words and terminologies and paths, and ultimately we're all on this journey for happiness and the avoidance of suffering. We're all in that human experience. But in the psychological research, there was a big movement in the 80s and the 90s for self-esteem, right? This is a kind of mirror work, look in the mirror. By the way, some of these things are good. I'm not saying that they're not, right? The mirror work, I'm enough, I'm beautiful, I'm good, I'm amazing. And we saw a lot of positive self-talk, which in schools, can help. They found things could improve. But the back ends of these studies found basically that, you are prone to ego defensive anger. You're prone to fall from grace. You're even prone to narcissism, which is really, really important to understand all these things. Again, no one really wants to become those things. It can happen though. Why? Self-esteem says, I love me when the world loves me. Okay, it's external. It's based on the circumstances of your life. So when your bank balance is up, when you've got dates in the calendar with women, or when your wife or partner loves you or makes love to you, then you feel good about yourself. Of course, it's easy to feel good about ourselves in those situations. But what happens when someone dies? What happens when all of a sudden there's an unexpected natural disaster like COVID? You can't control for these things. And so self-compassion says, I love me unconditionally. And that's one of the key messages, whenever I'm working with someone or doing a talk or speaking, is this moving from the conditional to the unconditional.
Yeah. And that external validation, actually, all it does is feed the ego. It just builds up the ego as an entity that needs to be needs to defend itself, needs to hold itself to be true, to be right. So in fact, like a lot of the self-esteem work, like you said, the mirror work, saying I'm good, if the world shows me I'm good, and so forth. All that does is build up someone's ego, and it gets it more and more large and more inflated. And like you said, it becomes a defense mechanism. Anger can come out in really toxic ways. Like you said, narcissism, because we become this like, I need the world to look at me in a certain way for me to be I need the world to look at me positively for me to feel positive about me, which can lead to us trying to manipulate the world for it to look at us in the way we want it to, instead of being with what the truth is.
Yes. And to go one step further, just from basic science and laws of averages, what the whole self-esteem movement can kind of trick you into is thinking that you have to be the best or in the top 5 or 10% to feel good. And it's just not possible. Like, we can't all be the best. Like, yes, you may have something that, and I do believe in this, like spiritual gifts, that you're gifted and you're going to be in your specific niche something incredible at, but you can't pin all your happiness on this thing that's out of your control. And so I would, for example, this is what the old age truth of the Bhagavad Gita said, or the Tao Te Ching, that says you have a right to your actions, but not the fruits of your actions. Focus on the process, not the outcome. Do your work, then step back. That's the only path to serenity. Now, the self-esteem movement is kind of like, you can celebrate once you got the medal and the plaque and you got the awards and the money in your bank. We all know where that ends up. It ends up feeling really unworthy and inadequate about yourself. And I'm blessed to have worked with loads of different people and have close connection with people who have massive like followings and hundreds of thousands of people and these things. And just to let you know that they're no happier often than people I know who are doing their everyday things. So if the avoidance of suffering and happiness is our goals, the deepest human desires and motivations, then surely we can shortcut all of this, all of this potentially inauthentic work that we're doing to try and bolster our position in comparison to other people, and just love ourselves deeply for who we are right now in this moment and accept where we are. When we can do that, then as it is, paradoxically, the world opens up for you. You're able to help more people, love more openly, and be your most authentic self.
I know, as I hear you say that, loving yourself as you are, there's this like little voice in my head. It's my inner critic. My inner critic is highly active, but it's almost the voice of the men I speak to and the clients I have sometimes, who are like, well, if I love myself as I am, I'm not going to change. I'm not going to like aspire to be more. I'm not going to, expand and grow, because I'm just going to go, well, I'm happy where I am. I'm good as I am. I love myself as I am. I'm just going to like sit here and do the same thing I've been doing and just carry on. Like, what do you say to that sort of rebuttal about kind of self-love and compassion?
It's a great point and a really lovely question. So when your mother was little, did you want your mother to allow you to play video games and sit on the couch all day? Is that love? Or is that fear through upsetting and pleasing you? What's more loving is to, accept that, of course, kids want to have fun and do their own thing and etc., but to still have boundaries in place and to still desire a new future that's aligned to your true authenticity. So motivation, you're absolutely right. This is the carrot and stick approach. Okay, so let's talk about the science of this. The carrot and stick approach of motivation. Yes, if I don't beat myself up, I'm not hard on myself, I won't have the motivation or the drive to succeed. And a lot of people go, but it's worked for me. I have got to where I am because I'm hard on myself. And what I say to that is, but at what cost? What's happened right now? look at your life. And also, second to that, what got you here won't get you there. You're a different person now through all the beating ups that you've had, through the neural chemistry that changes. Whether you criticize yourself or someone else, the same neurochemicals get released, and the same neurochemicals can cause stress and eventually dis-ease in your body. So a deeper motivation comes from this place of freedom and contribution and growth. And that comes from self-compassion. That comes from understanding who you are, accepting where you are. The best analogy actually is the Chinese finger trap. Okay, so a Chinese finger trap here. If you're resisting the Chinese finger trap, you can't get out of it. But self-compassion is you're turning towards and you're just touching your fears, your shadow, your doubts, or your insecurities. You don't need to, this is a big point, you don't need to explore them in as much depth as people think. Just touch them. And as you do, then you become free and you get the motivation and the drive and the connection and the love and the desire that you want.
Mm-hmm. That's the touching is a really interesting analogy used there, because that's often the thing that we're resisting, isn't it, in life? That's like creating a lot of the, should we call, I don't like to usually call them this, but it's easy for people to understand, the negative emotions that we're experiencing or the negative patterns.
Yeah.
Is the resistance of actually touching those parts, the shadow, the inner critic, and so forth. And I guess a question for you is, what are some of the signs maybe in someone's life that they are avoiding touching those uncomfortable parts of themselves, in aid of trying to kind of just have ease instead of growth?
Yes. Many different signs. So probably the best way is kind of to paint a picture. So imagine this, okay? So you are working long hours at a job that if you really took your time away, it's not fully aligned to what you want to do, your purpose, what you love, who you really are. You're working long hours and you've got umpteen emails to read. You've got a mate stag do to plan. You've got a partner's birthday coming up. And these are all just general day-to-day things. You're just feeling completely overwhelmed. So what do you do on a Friday? You come out, you crack the beer open. You maybe scroll on your phone. Maybe you watch porn. Or maybe you dive deeper into your work. All there to escape the feelings that clearly, if you face them, might be a bit overwhelming. Maybe those feelings are grief. Maybe you've got repressed grief for the life that you knew that you could have had. The grief doesn't just have to be death. It can be about a belief system. Maybe you're feeling some fear about the dangers of you knowing that you're not being healthy right now. And 5-10 years down the line, you could be, getting a heart condition or something worrying like that. And maybe you're feeling just frustration and anger because things have to change. Like, I can't carry on doing this. I don't love my life. There are people out there who are loving their life, and I know that that's possible, and I'm not doing that right now. So escape is one of the most common ways, but here's a simple phrase to remember how you suppress your emotions or how you kind of avoid the negative emotion. And I just want you to remember S-E-E, suppress, over-express, and escape. So we spoke about escape there. The bigger picture in all of this is all emotions have a purpose, okay? And yes, I agree with you. There are negative emotions and positive emotions. In fact, the scientific research says that out of the 7 basic emotions, only 1 is purely positive. How crazy is that? So now you see why we have a negativity bias. But if you really look deeper into the negative emotions, what you'll see is that it's just an unfulfilled need that we have. And in that moment, we feel separate. We don't feel fulfilled. And that's why we're experiencing that negative emotion. And now we can see all of that story that I just mentioned. All of those negative emotions are like teachers. They're like breadcrumbs on the path to your authentic self. And so you can look into them and go, oh, what's the reason? What's the purpose I'm feeling? What's the purpose of this frustration I'm feeling right now? what's the hidden payoff that I'm getting by staying in the situation as it is? This is a huge question. What's the hidden payoff? So you realize, oh, there's not just one part of me, there's so many parts of me. And these different parts of me, that's what the inner critic is. They're in conflict, they're vibing for who has the most attention. So, in summary, C, suppress, overexpress, and escape emotions. All emotions have a purpose. They're guiding you to your authentic truth. The negative ones, there's nothing wrong with them. They're there. And they can be breadcrumbs to us really understanding ourselves at a deep level. And ultimately, self-knowledge and a deep self-understanding, that is the key to end suffering and become happy. That's everything flows downstream from that.
Yeah, and I'm going to really jump onto the piece you said about the hidden payoff, because I think we don't often realize that we are in some part of us is benefiting from the kind of emotion that we habitually are feeling. Like if it's frustration or sadness, typically I see with people who are like sad, their thing is they get to complain to everybody. They get to be the victim. They get to be the person. Or if they're people who are being, they feel they're being abused. And I think I say that more in a sense of like maybe taken for granted, for instance. They get the attention of the kind of victim and so forth. Or the person who has kind of suppressed anger, their payoff could be all manner of things. But there's this hidden payoff that we aren't aware of, that we get to there's like it's like a dark joy we get to experience. Some part of us gets some dark joy, and that's feeding us. So how do we go about finding out what is that hidden payoff that we are often quite addicted to?
You have nailed that, and that's beautifully described, David. So let's do this at 3 levels. Let's do this at the psychological level, the scientific level, and then the spiritual level. Okay, so what's the hidden payoff? So the first thing to understand, really honestly, what I'm about to share with you, I strongly recommend you pause it and you write these things down, or stop and listen to this again. Because when you really understand the purpose of emotions, your whole perspective on your life will change. Emotions color every aspect of your life, absolutely everything. It's the one constant. So psychologically, we know that emotions help us survive and thrive. It was Darwin in 1881 that started writing about this, and then various people afterwards have done a lot of studies on this. So anger is there to defend resources. Sadness is there to help you seek support and for introspection and reflection. And fear is there for danger, of course, to help us make us aware when there's danger. So now we can see, right, these emotions, they have a psychological payoff for us, which can be positive, right? Like you said, sadness, you get support from other people. Fear can help us prevent something could be physically dangerous for us. And anger is going to help us defend our resources. But then neurochemically, how this happens, how we become addicted, is because these emotions are for our survival, which is stimulating. It stimulates you, right? If you think about the nervous system, rest and digest, fight and flight, fight, flight, freeze, these neurochemicals that get released in negative emotions, they temporarily help you feel more on. So you're more alert, you're more aware of your surroundings and your danger, your blood pressure goes up, heart rate goes up, etc., etc., etc. So it does make you feel temporarily a little bit better, which is why we are in a whole cycle. To go through this just a little bit more depth, there's basically 3 brain systems described by Professor Paul Gilbert, who's an incredible professor from Derby, who writes a lot about compassion. And he says we've got a threat system, we've got a wanting system, and a soothe system. So basically, in the modern world, we are moving between the threat and wanting system, right? The payoff we often get is we get a little buzz of the adrenaline and cortisol, And that, in a way, kind of drives us to want more stuff, dopamine. And then we're in this kind of scrolling social media, sugar, sex, all these instant gratification, essentially. We're in this loop. So that's the hidden payoff that we get. Now, at a deeper level, at a more spiritual level, and this is quite profound. I don't know how deep you guys want to go into it, but the other weird payoff that we get at a spiritual level is we get to continue to uphold this belief of our insignificance, right? To say that we are not as powerful as we think we are. We are not as infinite, as limitless, as eternal. We are not pure potential because look, I've got these problems in my life and I'm experiencing these negative emotions. And so it plays into the whole conditioning of the world. It wants you to be small, wants you to be in your, limited state. And that's one of the most challenging things to break free from. Because when you realize that, okay, I'm addicted to these states, unworthiness, etc. It's the most liberating thing that you'll ever experience when you start to kind of realize, okay, I don't need to govern my whole life based on these glasses that tell me that I'm not capable, worthy, good enough. And it's very profound when that happens, though.
You described the addiction there. This addiction to the instant gratification, and also the I kind of hear in what you're saying around the belief. The ego comes in again. It's like, we have this belief that we're not good enough, or we are insignificant in some way, or not lovable. And though there's a part of us that wants to disprove this belief, disproving it takes us into an unknown experience. So yes, we kind of stay in it, and we can get that. I work a lot in the realm of love and relationship. So a lot of people have beliefs that come to me. We uncover beliefs around being lovable, being good enough, and the way in which we create the circumstances for us to experience the emotions that reinforce the fact that this belief is true. Yes. Someone who, for instance, doesn't believe they're lovable, they may chase relationships constantly, looking for new partners, looking to be loved, being somewhat desperate in love, be overbearing, be too clingy. Then they get dumped, and then they're in this woe, but they keep getting to experience themselves as not being lovable, because that is the deep-rooted belief that they unconsciously wanted to keep hold of, because if they were to become lovable, then that would expand their limit of who they believe themselves to be. And that is too uncomfortable for the ego to kind of tend with.
That's it. And you've described that so beautifully, David. So the ego wants life. I remember once one of my spiritual teachers, as I alluded to, I shared that when I started to break my own addiction from these negative emotions, my life became chaotic. I went through so much hardship. I started to rewrite the rules in everything in my life, and things got really difficult. I spoke to one of my teachers, and he told me this story about a yogi who was meditating in a cave for 10 years. And he came out and he looked, he thought, oh, I'm not very dirty. That's quite good. When he went down to the river to wash, and as he went down to the river to wash, he realized he was caked in dirt. And my teacher said to me, he said, the purification process has begun. Okay, just now that you've poked the ego wants life, just like how your soul wants life. And now the ego is going to kind of challenge you and bring things up. And yeah, I mean, it's a real challenge to break the addiction. But when you start to do it and you start to realize, oh, I've been addicted to my own stress, I've been addicted to these negative emotions. And you can do that with compassion, right? You can understand, oh, guess what? I have done that, but I'm not alone in that. I'm a human, and we all get addicted to our own suffering. It happens. Then, it leads you to a life of authenticity and freedom and love. And yeah, I do love the example you brought up in love, how we can get addicted to our partners and perhaps, sex-seeking behaviors, whatever these things that make us feel temporarily good, but don't treat the deeper cause. Yeah.
And I wanted to talk about emotional mastery, because I know we've talked about kind of the addiction and emotional struggles. And I wondered, how do you describe to people what emotional mastery is? Because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what it is and kind of what it looks like.
Yes. Using your emotions as fuel for growth. Simple as that. Our emotions are our chemical compass, I like to say, that guide us to our authentic truth. There are a lot of misconceptions about what emotions are and what they're not. And, probably one of the most important ones, or the most important one to understand, I'll share it with a story. I remember in 2022, in fact, tomorrow, 3 years ago tomorrow, I received a call from my mum, and my dad was on holiday with my mum in Sri Lanka. It's about 9 p.m. at night. I was sitting at my table at home planning the week, and I received this call. I was a bit confused because it would have been the middle of the night in Sri Lanka. And as I picked up the phone, my dad was in cardiac arrest. I was like, wow. My dad had been chronically unwell, but it was a shock to see him. So I whispered some words into his ear, and he transcended. He left the world. Then a couple of weeks later, I was in Sri Lanka, and I was giving a reading at the funeral. I was reading a poem that I'd written. And as I was reading it, I remember thinking before, okay, I'm not going to cry, all right? This is probably before I was as far as I am on the journey now. And tears streamed down my face. And I couldn't help it. They were just completely coming. And so this is probably the biggest misconception of emotions I want to share, is that emotions come without invitation. So you can't control them. They happen based on our perception of the environment, and that happen based on our past stories. And there's no shame in experiencing any emotion. So this is a real key thing about emotional mastery. It's not numbing. It's not being happy all the time. It's not being in a state of pure bliss the whole time. Although, you may achieve that significantly more of the time on that journey. It's using your emotions as fuel for growth. And growth, it's one of the deepest desires we all have as humans. It was Carl Jung that said we all have an unconscious desire to know the self. That's what's driving, whether we realize it or not, that's what's driving all of us. So that's what we start with. There's many other misconceptions about emotions that I can go into. But I really would say if you're regularly checking in with how you feel and using that as a marker, as feedback for the purpose and the journey of your life, then you're on the emotional mastery journey. And that's a very beautiful thing. Even if you're only checking in every month, it's still doing it. Of course, with my clients, I encourage them to check in every hour. Like that's the frequency we play.
Yeah, there's a lot of misconception about emotional mastery, about how it's going to look in people when we become, what's the phrase to use here? When we are in the game of emotional mastery. Maybe that's not quite it, because you never gain, my belief is you never gain complete mastery. I think people expect that when you have complete mastery of your emotions, there'll be zero expression. And I think what I'm hearing you saying, I kind of believe is actually this is very much the opposite. We can we can honor what's there, and that can look like in different ways, right?
Yeah.
And I love what you said about using it as fuel, and like as a kind of opposite of that, it's like not allowing your emotions to kind of hold you back, actually, not being controlled by your emotions in a way that kind of holds back your own life and growth.
Yes.
As a part of it, because I'm thinking of, say, I think we have a terrible relationship to anger we have terrible relationship to anger, especially men, right? And
yeah.
I have my own experience of anger. You talk about being a nice guy. I know the term very well. Is like there's this anger that we feel we can't express.
Yes.
I grew up, I'm in my early 40s now, grew up in 90s, London, feeling like as a black man, I can never be angry. If I'm angry, I'm dangerous. So I can never show anger.
Yes.
And we often have this feeling about anger, is that anger is really, really dangerous. But you described something earlier, and you were talking about, I think it was about boundaries, resources, anger and around
Yes.
resources.
Yes.
And I always see this link between, it's been described to me this way, like anger and boundaries are really just linked, because it's a show that somewhere someone's crossed a boundary, or boundary's been crossed.
Yes.
And I guess a question I'm getting to with my ramblings is like, if we've habitually kind of struggled with anger, to express it, to be with it, to even be in the presence of it, because I think that's also an important thing, how can we start to gain emotional mastery over the particular emotion of anger?
Well, I love the story you shared, and it's so true. Thank you so much for sharing it. How do you gain emotional mastery over anger? Well, the thing about anger that people forget is actually it's an incredibly useful thing. You know, I think that's the big misconception. People feel that it's wrong, that it's dangerous. And sure, you know, like I said before, no emotion is right and wrong. What we want to do with all emotions is not suppress them. Just a little bit of history on this, which is really interesting. And the reason why people think suppression was expression, like talking about your emotions a lot, was a good thing, was because Freud came out and said that anxiety is caused by suppression, and he was right by that. So people thought the opposite, expression is the very thing that's going to help. Actually, what he really meant was all emotions, whether it's anger or fear or sadness or contempt or pain, whatever it is, what he was really encouraging to do is not suppress, instead channel the emotion into creativity and love and work and passion and drive. And that's what I'm talking about with emotional mastery is, okay, you've experienced these things, you've experienced this anger, your boundary's been crossed. With anger in particular, there's a lot of energy behind it. Some of the greatest, leaders of our time, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Mother Teresa, they're driven by anger initially. Then they channeled that anger in a very constructive way, peaceful protests, significant change in society. So if you're someone who's angry right now, like this could actually be a great stepping stone for you to transform your whole life, transform your family's lives, and ripple that out across. So yes, it's all about the transfer of energy, right? From where you were into where you want to go. And you hit the nail on the head. Anger for me is down to three things. When you feel blocked by someone or something, when someone's crossed your boundaries, or when something has to change. And yeah, it does relate to resources. So I suppose some of the key questions, you've got to ask yourself key questions. And a framework I would use is, it's essential as a man, especially in the noise of today's world, that you have some kind of introspective solitude practice where you go out into nature, or you are at home where there's literally nothing on, so no phone, no music, nothing. And you get to know yourself. It doesn't have to be a meditation or breath work, but a period of silence is key. And when you're there, you ask yourself, what's the purpose of the feeling that I'm feeling? And again, like I said, what's the hidden payoff that I'm getting from experiencing this? And you can go into it further, and you can say, what's the story behind this anger? And what you'll come to realize, and this is the whole principle of compassion, is that there's a purpose and a reason and a meaning behind all of our experiences. And then you can look at yourself kind of like the dog who's been brought up really badly and scowls at you when it's backed into a corner. You can understand, well, that dog was beaten, or that dog never was given the love and the food and the water that it needed when it was younger. So of course it's going to respond this way. So when you can get to that place of seeing yourself through those eyes and seeing that there were specific conditions that created these perceptions that's making you angry now, then you can stop attacking yourself and beating yourself down, and instead embrace your vulnerability and your humanism, that you're a human in the end of the day. So channel the anger, and it's a lot of energy behind it. A lot of change can happen as a result of it. And use a period of silence and introspection to ask yourself questions, to get to know yourself. And when you do that, then it's much easier to channel the energy into other pursuits.
Beautiful, man. I love that. And it's, I love how, and I don't know if this is something you conscious, and I know, we just kind of talked before, but it's like there's an ancientness to that practice, There's a real ancientness to that. Like at the moment, I'm in a Qigong dojo. And, there's this practice, like you said, going off into one of the things is the guy's given us to do is go into nature and do our 20-minute practice in nature.
Yeah.
But these things you're speaking of here, they're not something that, some scientists in the 80s came up with. This is stuff that people have been doing for like tens of thousands of years to help them understand the mind and understand the human experience more deeply, and to gain self-knowledge and self-experience of what's going on with them.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like I say, it's the most important thing, the most important gift you can ever give to yourself is understanding yourself. And that starts with going through your past stories, understanding what you value, what you've learned. And as time goes on, it gets deeper and deeper, and you begin to look at the whole nature of your mind. And you understand what I like to call the cinema effect. Have you ever been to the cinema? If you've got a partner or a friend, you go with your friend and you watch a movie, one of you's in floods of tears, the other one isn't. I mean, how often does that happen? It happens frequently, right? Why? Because their mind, their internal film projector, which is the mind, has a whole different lens, a whole different set of beliefs and paradigms. And if you really look into that, it is completely wild. You can then start to, like how they do in the most famous text, A Course in Miracles, they get you to look at things like this pen. And they say, I don't understand anything about this pen. I don't know any meaning about this pen. And you begin to realize that, okay, this pen is only called a pen because someone told me it was a pen. And the whole society says that's what this is. So then you start to go, right. So all of my negative thoughts, all of my identities that I have that hold myself back, they weren't there when I was born. They things I've absorbed from the world and from my caregivers. So now we can look at ourselves with compassion, and we can go, I can forgive myself because I acted in these ways because I didn't know I was acting out of my conditioning. So it's a profound thing when you really start to understand the self, and you really, really explore why you believe what you believe and how that potentially is stopping you from your authenticity.
Yeah. And as you said, that piece about the pen, it just kind of made me think of, it's just perspective, right? Our whole lives are this perspective that we experience through, like you said, the lens of our beliefs, our ideas, the conditioning we've received. And it's so multi-layered, because even down to the things we're willing to hear and not hear.
Yeah.
I think this is something, I talk a lot with people about listening and the power of listening, and how we don't actually listen very well because we only listen to the things, we basically only listen to the things we listen to, we only listen to the things we really hear. So often in, even, if you listen to these conversations, there's part of this conversation that you've just not heard because it doesn't enter into your mind, because it doesn't fit with your belief system. It doesn't fit with how you see yourself and who you believe yourself to be. And your brain will just discount that stuff. It literally will just go, no, I can't. No, that's just going to go in, like, and the saying goes, and in one ear, out the other. And this is happening on, really a small scale, like each moment, because I'm thinking of some of my clients who are like in conflict, and they find themselves literally not hearing the thing their partner says, or over indexing on one particular aspect of what's being said. And then it also happens on a very, societal level, where we just can't accept certain truths. Like they might be staring us in the face, but we just like, no, we can't hear that. That can't be the way that the world is. It's just so deep and multi-layered, this way in which our beliefs, both kind of personally, societally, from a, continent, country and a world perspective, influence what information we allow ourselves to kind of like assimilate.
Yeah, give me an example of that for you, David.
What's something that I couldn't, for many years, for so many years, actually, is a really good example. It kind of even tunes into the work that we did in our session. For many years, I could not believe in any sort of energy healing or energy work and all that kind of stuff. I was just like, no, this is all bollocks. This is all bullshit. These people are all fucking crooks and they're just trying to take advantage of you. Yeah. And I went and, I wouldn't say things shifted with me, but I had an experience. I went and stayed with what we kind of call my spiritual mentor. And she does like a week-long cleanse. And she's based in the Midlands. And you stay with her. And it was so funny because I arrived there. I ended up being late because I missed my train in the morning. And when I arrived, she was just like, oh, you're the energy of disorganization and chaos. And I remember being like, what are you talking about? And like, as I was at her house, all through that week, things in her house broke. Things didn't go well. Things like broke down and blah, blah, blah. And what I really witnessed was how I would get really frustrated with these things, right? And she was just so in the flow of life. It was just like easeful for her. But I think the thing that really struck me was I did she has a chiropractor you go and see, lovely guy called Mick, big Yorkshire man. And he cracked my back and did all that kind of chiropractor stuff. Then he put his hands on my feet. He just held his hands there. And then took his hands away and my mentor was like, what did you get there, Mick? And Mick looked at me and goes, and bear in mind, this man knows nothing about me. She, when I first met her, all she knew was my first name. And he just goes to me, I don't know if it's that your father's passed away or that he just wasn't in your life enough in any meaningful way. He's like, but you have to stop waiting for him to give you the blessing for you to move forward in your life and do the things you want to do. Unfortunately, you're never going to get that from him. And you're now in the phase of your life where you have to do that. You have to kind of co-sign and bless yourself and say, I'm enough, I'm good enough. I have the confidence to do the things that I really want to do. And I was absolutely stunned. I think I probably sat there, when people sit there with their like mouths wide open, like, what? I don't understand. I can't fathom how what you just said to me can make sense. Yes. And in that moment, I could have gone one of two directions or one of multiple directions. But one of the directions I could have gone was, oh, this guy's a fraud. She's found out information about me from a friend of mine and told him this stuff so he can tell me this stuff, so make me believe that he knows what he's doing, right? Mm. And I didn't choose that path because that might have been the path I took years ago. And this happened this probably happened about 6 or 7 years ago. And I got in the car with her and she was like, you haven't said anything. And I just burst into tears. Yeah. Because I was just like, my dad wasn't really there for me in the way that I wanted to emotionally and from a point of support and confidence and, all the sort of things that, a young boy needs a masculine figure to give to him. And it really, and that whole week of her, you see other people, crystal healers and all sorts of things, but it really just shifted my opinion about the things that science can't yet explain. Mm. And I use that word, science can't yet explain, even down to, I go and see, I do Reiki reasonably regularly with a friend of mine and so forth. And David from his corporate years working in tech, he would have never touched those things. It was just, it's all bollocks, all made up. But I've had such really beautiful and profound experiences in these things, but I could only have those experiences once my mind was open enough to have those experiences. Yeah, I absolutely love that story. I absolutely love that. And that actually, I'm going to share a story with the listeners about peak emotional states and how I came to spirituality, because I actually was an atheist. And I didn't mention it, but I have a son and a daughter. And when my son was born, about 9 months in, 6 to 9 months in, he started to scream randomly and not make eye contact. And he started to have really challenging behavior. This was one of my first moments of awakening, really. And, it was really, really hard. The nursery couldn't handle him at the time. And I was thinking, I'm going to have to leave my job as a doctor. I'm going to have to be at home and care for him. This is all what my mind was all playing in the future. I was really going through a lot of difficulty with that. And spirituality just kept coming up. All the doctors I was seeing were talking about spirituality. So
I resisted it for a long time. And then finally I started to read various spiritual books. And now I know I could actually feel the energy of these books. But at the time I was like, these books feel weird, I used to say. And I remember one day, in my first full spiritual experience, I was reading a book called Ask and It's Given by Esther Hicks. You know, it's the classic book by Abraham. And as I was reading it, I'd been meditating for probably about a couple of years, but they described how meditation felt. It was the first time someone had perfectly described exactly what I would feel in meditations. And click, 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 I felt this massive like energy rise all the way throughout my body. And boom, I was having a Kundalini. Now I know it as a Kundalini experience. So it felt like, for those of you back in the day, I'd gone to a rave and taken ecstasy. That's what it felt like. My whole body was buzzing. My pupils were actually a little bit bigger. I tracked my heart rate and all this stuff, and that was much lower. I felt in this place, nothing could move me. My kids were still screaming, running about the place. And I remember it so clearly. That day we went on a family holiday. The car broke down. Various things happened. My jaw hurt because I was smiling so much. And after that day, like, life wasn't the same again. I realized, there is a state of pure bliss of who you really are, that, is kind of beyond words. And that started after that experience. I didn't tell anyone about it. Like, I didn't tell anyone because I was almost scared. Like, oh, people will think I'm nuts or crazy or whatever. And now I spoke about my meditation teachers telling me it was a Kundalini type experience, a rising of energy. And after that, I became obsessed with energy. I realized, well, energy is everything. I was in a state where clearly I tapped into an energy where I was, in the state of unconditional peace and happiness and joy. And it felt incredible. And you can't describe it. It felt amazing. And so then I became obsessed with learning about energy. And I realized, the science can't yet describe it, but we all know it, right? We all know when you walk into a room and someone's looking at you, you can tell if they're looking at you. That's energy. You can sometimes receive a text message and you were thinking about that person. That's energy. You can, there's a million one examples of this, right? You can we know these kind of psychic things are very, very common with mother and baby. Where's the science there? There's no science in that. Like, there's not something that we can measure, if you like, to say, how does the mum intuitively know if the son is 7 and the other way across the world? It's because of energy. There's a psychic cord and a connection. I know all this stuff now, and I think that's what led me to start doing energy and working with energy and doing energy healing. And, even for a long time, I was doing the healings, but I wasn't telling anyone. I was in the closet. Mm. I was doing it all on myself. I didn't tell anyone that I was doing this stuff. And my life started to transform in ways I could never imagine. I was a doctor working full-time as a GP. And there I was in the space of a few years. I'm working with a guy who's an entrepreneur, who's 8 figures. His mission is to solve the education crisis in Africa. I'm like, it blows my mind. That's all happened because of working with energy and these energetic shifts. So, yes, if anyone is skeptical, I completely hear them. I was like that. I was an atheist. I was very anti a lot of spiritual stuff. And then I started to have spiritual experiences and life was never the same. So it's kind of like saying people that judge spirituality is kind of like people who judge Michelin star food without tasting it. Like, you got to taste it.
Yeah, it's a really good analogy, and it resonates with me. Is for one really big reason. I was probably one of those people who judged that food. Like, why am I going to go to a restaurant and get little diddy food on a plate? Like, what's the point in that? That's stupid. And then I had a shift. How did my shift occur? I had an ex-girlfriend, and I know she really liked Gordon Ramsay. So we went to Claridge's one year. This was like, we're going back easily 12, 15 years, and we went to Claridge's for dinner. And I'll never forget that night at Claridge's because of the felt experience I had. And I guess I'm using this example because the one thing that both of us kind of described in our spiritual experiences, and we've probably had loads, is there's a felt experience that cannot be denied. Well, it can be denied if we choose to, but there's a felt experience in the body that we feel like from a, should we say for the listeners, a physical and even emotional point of view.
Yes.
I sat in this restaurant and I was so well attended to. I remember that I noticed that my glass of wine was never empty, but I never saw anyone pour it. My glass of water was never empty, but no one ever poured in. I never saw anyone pour that glass. There were even moments where I remember that I wanted to go to the toilet and I thought, I want to go to the toilet now. And I would literally go to stand up and then my chair moved away from me behind, as if like someone was reading my mind. And why I described this experience in Claridge's, it's because I had this experience and it shifted my mind to what I now believed was true. After that, I was like, oh, this is why people do this. This is why people go to Michelin-star restaurants, because the exquisite experience of not just a taste of the food, but just this taste of being in this space with the people being taken care of, being looked after, makes the price well worth it. But I think we have to always, and this is always the case, right, for any sort of growth work, I think, as I'm thinking, this is like we must be open enough when those moments arrive, because I'm sure we've all had experiences where it could have been a moment of opening, spiritual opening, emotional opening, and something in us, most likely ego, shuts it down very quickly.
Yeah.
Or like detaches from it. Like, oh, I can't, maybe it could be crying at something that occurred in our lives, or it could be a spiritual experience that's energetic. And our ego just goes, no, I'm not having this. We self-sabotage it in some way.
Yeah, of course. And like I said, the ego is vibing for life. The ego wants you to be, it doesn't want you to be in your potential. It wants you to be safe. It wants you to be in certainty and in the known. But what is the known? The known is only ever the past. And there's no evolution or growth in that. So what we do is we wrap the ego in love and we say, thank you, you're helpful, you're worthy, you're significant too. We acknowledge it and we appreciate its role. And then we gently tell it, no, but I'm going this way. I'm stepping into my potential. I'm going to set up that business. I'm going to find the love of my life. I'm going to speak to my partner and tell her that I have different sexual desires in the bedroom, and that's going to help us grow and expand. Life is too short to suppress your authenticity. You must embody who you really are in this world. But I do think it's a big paradox, the authenticity paradox. And this is something, I've experienced a lot in my own life, is stepping into your authenticity is the scariest thing that you can do. Is actually the opposite. When people say your authenticity is about doing what you love, I actually say, no, it's about releasing all of the things it's doing the things that you're afraid of. That's what it really is. It's about shining love onto the areas of your life that are absent of love. So yeah, absolutely face your fears, step into your authenticity, and just the mind will play all kinds of tricks on you. It still does, it still does with me. It happens to all of us. And that's why actually, to bring back that silence practice, that's why those practices are so important, to remind yourself of that, the mind, you are not your mind. You are not your thoughts, your emotions, your beliefs. You are not that. You actually have the power to transcend the mind and direct the mind. The mind can become your best friend because you can then start to command it and direct it. But it does need that direction. And that only comes when we tap into our true self or our authenticity. And then we can, guide it and use, as we said earlier, use our emotions, use our challenges as fuel for growth.
Yeah. And one of the things I want to cover before we finish up, actually, and you've alluded to it a few times, is like, our emotions, a lot of people think their emotions. They talk about their emotions from this very intellectual place.
Yeah.
And we know that from, there's a whole body of work around the fact that emotions are experienced in the body. And I guess I've had experience of this for you, but I also like to know what you you want the listeners to know as well is like, how do you use somatic body-based practices in your work to help people cultivate emotional mastery?
Yes. So obviously I've come from a background of 10 years in medicine. So the body has always been a deep fascination of mine. And it must not be missed on your self-care journey. And it's often missed on your emotional mastery journey. So how do we use the body? I mean, if you want to look like, how do we process emotions? Okay. Or what's the method I use? I can share that. And there's 4 parts of the self: emotional self, physical self, intellectual self, and spiritual self. And so for the purpose of this, we're going to talk about 3. We're going to talk about physical, intellectual, and spiritual. And that's how you're going to deal with your emotions. So let's take the emotion of grief. Let's say you've lost something, someone, there's regret, there's pain, there's hurt, there's upset, there's resentment. Maybe it's a breakup, maybe it's a job, maybe it's a belief system, like, you've left a culture or a religion or something of that form. You're going to do the work of forgiveness now on 3 levels, okay? First of all, you're going to find the emotion of grief in your body. So that's the somatic bit. You're going to tune into your intuitive wisdom and say, where do I feel this emotion? And usually you're going to feel it somewhere, let's say in the heart or in the power center or in the top of the tummy. But you might also feel it in your shoulders or your legs or somewhere else. And what you're then going to do, and don't be fooled by the simplicity of this, okay? The mind will trick you and say, this doesn't work, I have seen it in my life time and time and time again. These things with certainty work. You're going to breathe into that area, okay, at a rate of, let's say, about 5 in, 5 out. And that breath is going to become one with that emotion. So that emotion, you might start to visualize it as, a texture or a shape or a color, and you'll find it in the body. And instead of moving away from our emotions, which we're taught to do, we're taught to suppress them or go into the corner, or boys don't cry, get on with it, get back to work. That was just a bad dream. Don't think about that. Instead of that, you're going to do the Chinese finger trap, and you're going to move towards it, and you're going to touch the emotion of grief. You're going to show it you're not scared of it. Feel it, and then allow it to naturally run its course. Now, for something like grief, it could be 10, 20 minutes that you're experiencing that for, but on the whole, science will show you that the emotion really, if you get beyond your story, the emotion should really only last a couple of minutes. So that's the physical aspect, somatic. Another thing you can do to process your emotions on this as well, that's the somatic stuff, but I'll give you two other things, is letter writing. So this is really amazing for the intellectual side of you. So if you're someone that's quite mind heavy and quite intellectual, then you're just going to write out, basically, I won't go into the whole process, but you're going to write a letter to your younger self or to someone that's hurt or betrayed you or upset you. And that in itself, you talk about energy, the amount of times my clients have done that practice, they have not sent the letter, I've had it with me as well, and the person has then, they've got connected with the person who they wrote the letter about. And then spiritually, how do you process your emotions? Well, if you believe in a higher power or the universe or God, you actually do the whole process of surrender with that. You tune into what emotion you want to release, and you just give it up. You allow it. You say, I can't control this anymore. I don't need to hold on to this anymore. And with the energy of gratitude and forgiveness, you allow that to be processed and go. So, I mean, I know I spoke about more than the somatics there, but I wanted to give you just a little framework for how we process emotions. And it will be uncomfortable the first few times you do this. You'll think, do I have to do this? But what I urge you to do, if you're quite a logical, intellectual person, is track the data. So try this practice, be a scientist with yourself. Write down the situation that you've got and watch how, when you process the emotions, how first of all, you will change. And because you change, the situation, of course, changes as well.
And then all those practices have like a real body of scientific work to say that they work, you know, from the body-based stuff to all the polyvagal and the somatic work. The letter writing is something that, you know, we know that, you know, I do a lot of, I've done a lot of work in men's work and with my clients as well around forgiving of parents has a really, really powerful way of being. And then even the piece about surrendering to God, that's kind of feels very 12-step, you know, and the 12-step process is like, though it wasn't created by a therapist or any sort of scientist, has been one of the most profound things that's, you could argue, one of the most profound processes has been brought in to deal with addiction. And the number of, you know, 100%. We're probably talking millions of people that it's served there. So, and I always speak to the skeptical listener, you know, because these things aren't just some things that, you know, Nilesh has just dreamed up and told you. These are things that have been researched by hundreds and thousands of people and tried by, you know, millions of people that have supported them in emotional growth and a deeper understanding of self, like a cultivation of depth.
Yeah, 100%. You know, there's a whole department. What I was talking about there is really forgiveness. And forgiveness is not about them, it's about you. It's a letting go of any negative emotions you're holding on to about a situation. That's what I mean by it. But Stanford University has a whole department named after it, the Forgiveness Project, sorry. It has a whole project based on forgiveness that shows you that it creates alpha brain waves and lowers blood pressure and improves heart health, amongst many, many other benefits. So yeah, there is pretty strong science. And interestingly enough, when I was working as a doctor and I was getting into this kind of world, I noticed that when people were blocked in their health, it was that piece of they were carrying guilt, blame, shame, anger, frustration, and like the forgiveness work was the thing that unlocked the next level. So very, very powerful. And yes, lots of science and lots of historic wisdom-based ancient data as well on it.
Awesome. And to finish up, actually, a question for you. What's your kind of personal practices to keep you in the lane of emotional mastery that you kind of focus on from a kind of day-to-day basis?
I mean, I have many. I'm tuning in to see what should I share with you guys today. I'm actually going to talk about sleep because sleep is a real passion of mine. As you can see, I'm currently tracking both with Aura and Whoop, which is that's how obsessive I have got with sleep at the moment. But it is really, the science and the data will show that it's one of the most powerful things you can do to process your emotions. Why? Deep sleep is amazing for learning and creativity in that heart rate, blood pressure drops, but also REM sleep very powerfully in the second half of the night, rapid eye movement sleep. There's a specific process that goes on called fear extinguishing. Now, just to put this into context, right? When you sleep, your brain is basically like filing through the different experiences of the day, and it files them based on emotion. So things that had a lot of emotional energy behind them, funnily enough, you remember them versus the things that are just a bit more banal and boring, right? So when you get in your REM sleep properly, it's going to help you process fear and trauma and anxieties, and research will even show that people who have gone through trauma experience less PTSD if they've got better REM sleep. So for me, 3 M's and 3 R's for my sleep routine. I mean, there's a whole lot, but I'll just share this basic one. 3 M's in the mornings, morning light, as many people are aware of. It's very, very powerful. Right now I'm using a sad light because sometimes I've got my kids, I can't go outside in the morning. And then meditation. And of course, undeniably morning movement. Morning movement sets the rhythm of your body to sleep well at night. And so those 3 things are an essential. And then in the evening, and this is something I'm personally working on being better, is the wind down. So the R is the reset. So a certain time of night, phone goes away, it gets plugged, goes in a separate room. Review. And this one I've actually found to probably be the most impactful. It's just writing down thoughts at the end of the day and writing out what I'm going to do the following day, because ultimately the reason why we're up in the night or tossing and turning or not getting good sleep, it's because the thinking mind, prefrontal cortex, is switched on. And then the last R is what I like to call replenish. So I do a bit of slow breathing in bed to help me, calm down the nervous system and get into deep sleep. So sleep was a big obsession of mine before this whole world, and it's really, really underrated. One thing I will say is it has meant for me that I've had to cancel some social plans and things sometimes. However, the payoff has been huge. And that's only because I'm a morning guy, so it won't be the case always for you guys.
Yeah. I'm just going to just add in or say is I equally have become a little bit obsessed with sleep in the last kind of 18 months, because what I started to really see about myself was if I'm not well slept, I'm grumpy. I struggle to focus. I struggle to pay attention. I'm emotionally reactive. I have less cognitive ability to think about things and process things. I'm not as good as a coach if I'm not well slept, and I'm a shit partner, right? If I'm chronic, if I'm tired week on week, I'm a terrible partner. I'm not interested in affection. I am likely to shut down. I'm likely to not want to talk, all these things. And like you, one of the things I do with my clients, one of the first things I do with them is okay, how are you sleeping? And they're like, what do you mean, how am I sleeping? I'm like, because if you sleep better, your relationship will be better straight away, instantly. It's going to improve if you sleep better. And I too have become very obsessed with my aura numbers, to really observe and check and find out what works in terms of the morning and the evening. And it doesn't have to be, what you've described, Dev, is actually super simple. It's half an hour on each end of the day, half an hour, an hour on each end of the day. And I have a very similar kind of setup that allows me, that I found in the last 6 weeks, that almost guarantees really good sleep. And I have a 8-month-old baby as well.
That's
who sleeps
amazing.
in the room with us.
What is that? Tell us.
So for me, it's like you said, waking up in the morning and moving. I combine the movement and sunlight. My little boy, he's small enough that I can still put him in a sling and we can go for a walk. Sometimes we jump in the car and drive to the forest. Sometimes we just walk on the street. In the morning as well, I try and get some sort of practice of stretching. I find stretching really helps me as well. And some sort of stillness, whether that's meditation or breath work. Sometimes the breath work happens when I'm feeding him a bowl in the morning at 7:30 a.m. I put a little track on. He's drinking his bowl. I'm breathing, looking deep into his eyes.
Lovely.
Something that gets us still. And in the evening, I have, there's some breath work. I sit down on my meditation cushion and do. And I have a particular meditation I found now combined with a yoga nidra when I'm in bed to just release the day. And I've actually started to put my journal in the front room to try and create space for journaling. But I've been not as good as putting down my laps. Yoga nidra to do in bed.
I mean, the very kind of simple is raising of the heart rate in the morning, lowering it as much as possible in the evening. I feel like we're all guilty. I'm definitely guilty of the heart rate just being a little too elevated in the evenings. That's the game changer to getting the real sleep, because that stops you going deep. And if you guys listening are an entrepreneur or a founder, then creativity is essential, and so it's a really big one. Very interesting to speak about. I mean, honestly, you could do a whole podcast on sleep, of course, and many people do.
Yeah, there's so many podcasts on sleep, many of which I've listened to. Oh, brother, it's been such a fantastic conversation to talk about emotions in such depth, right? So, and there's even things we didn't quite get to touch on, but to really get into the depth of emotions and how we feel them, why we feel them, how we can use them for our betterment of life, but also to see it not just from a scientific point of view, but also from that spiritual point of view of, what has been said for literally ages, in the world around our emotions and how we can use them for the betterment and not just this. Because I think as men, as people in the West, we often see emotions as this pesky thing that gets in the way of doing, when in fact, actually they are, like you mentioned, for you, it's the fuel to the fuel for us to burn for our passions, our meaning, for our purpose. So I'm just
Absolutely.
super grateful for
Absolutely.
this conversation and for how you show up in the world and your work. It's been really beautiful to talk to you at depth today.
And I loved hearing your stories as well, David. The questions are fantastic. So thanks so much. And, what I'd just say to any of the listeners is if you're experiencing any problems in your life, anything that's unwanted, don't resist and just start with your emotions. Just look at them with love and compassion and realize the humanness of all of us. Like, we all want to be happy. We all want to avoid suffering. You're not alone in any of your experiences. And I'm sure if you follow the breadcrumbs, then you will experience some really beautiful things beyond your wildest imagination.
Yeah. And I'm sure the listeners are wondering where they can hear more from you, where they can work with you, and if you've got any sort of workshops or programs or courses coming up in the near future.
Interesting. So I actually, there you go, it's some emotion card for me. I don't usually plug for anything. I very much view all the pods as selfless service. I absolutely love doing this just for anyone to come and experience the deep work that's my purpose work, what I'm here to do, and the gift that I have for you. If you'd like to go deeper, what makes a massive difference is engaging with us on Instagram, and I've got a YouTube being set up, which I'm quite excited by. So just showing your face and saying hi. And I work with a small number of people on one-on-one. I work with visionaries, people who are creative, inspirational, resilient, future-focused, empathic. Usually to work with me, you've got to have some kind of vision that's helping others, helping humanity. And but you might be a bit blocked by some blind spots. And we spoke a bit about that today. But the best place is to start with Instagram or YouTube, stay connected on there. In terms of what we have, I've got some events hopefully coming up, which I'm quite excited by. And as well, a course that's going live and a lot more podcasts. But feel free to connect. I've got a bunch of free resources as well, of course, that you can come and explore on my page. And I love connecting with you. So thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome, man. And all those links to his Instagram are going to be down in the show notes. So you have to just go down and click there and it'll take you straight to Instagram, to Nilesh's page. Fantastic. So listeners, this is one of those episodes that you probably should share with someone. There's someone in your life who struggles with emotions. Maybe it's expression, maybe it's just being with, maybe it's acceptance, maybe there's inner critic, or there's some emotional piece that you can see that can support them. It might be a partner, it might be a friend, it could be a family member or even a parent. So this is one of those episodes you just send it over to them so they can take in this transmission of how we can be of our emotions and just see how that shifts their life, not in any sort of judgmental way, but just with loving support and compassion for their experience. So feel free to share this with anyone in your life. But this is the end of the podcast, and I will let you get on with the rest of your day and say ciao.